This is a video about the history of cryptocurrency and specifically about the narrative surrounding cryptocurrency and how uniformly negative it is. Roughly every 4 years with each cryptocurrency market cycle, we see a similar thing. There are more people in the mainstream who become aware of crypto. They know it's going up in value. They start to pay attention to it. And then also invariably, some bad actors in the space, virtually all of whom are men, do something bad. And then that narrative becomes all about how cryptocurrency as a sector is gross and evil. And I want to talk about the damage in that. How this narrative, this mainstream narrative, makes it really hard to examine how the technology, blockchain technology, can actually be used for good. All of this touches on why there are no women in cryptocurrency. There are very few female founders in tech in general, and there are almost none in cryptocurrency. And this sheds a lot of light on why. So that this isn't too heavy, because I know it weighs on me an awful lot, I'm gonna include footage of my puppy. Okay, so in the early days, people were technologists and enthusiasts. Not very many people knew that Bitcoin even existed as a thing. They could mine it on their home computers, like at night while they were sleeping, because it didn't require that much computing power to do so back at that time. And a lot of these people were just like good, regular, mostly dudes, who then got super excited as the price started to go up.
I'm right here watching history be made. Bitcoin is now up to $111. It's an all-time high, and it's continuing to rise. I've seen it break 3 times today. It went up to 110, and this is the highest that it's been. It's ridiculous.
Something integral to Bitcoin's design is an event called the halving. After every 210,000 blocks have been mined. It happens roughly every 4 years, and that has been kind of a marker for these cryptocurrency market cycles that we've seen. When that happens, the network automatically cuts the rewards that it generates to the miners in half. That's why it's called the halving. It used to more often be called the halvening. The creator wanted a deflationary currency to counteract what was going on with fiat currency like the US dollar that is inflationary and therefore keeps losing its value. On January 3rd, 2009, the first ever block, the Genesis block on the Bitcoin blockchain, was mined. And something that's interesting about that is that in what's called the Coinbase, that's why if you're familiar with that centralized exchange Coinbase, that's why it's called that. Within the Coinbase of that block, there was a copy of a headline about the second government bailout of the banks. Even though the creator of Bitcoin remains anonymous, creator or creators, we can infer that Bitcoin was a response to what was going on with the Great Recession. With the collapse of banks and the government bailouts of banks, the narrative back then was a lot about Main Street bailing out Wall Street, the taxpayers bailing out the fat cat bankers, and the fat cat bankers got away with it and didn't see any consequences. So then for a period of time, Bitcoin was the only cryptocurrency. A big day was what's now known as Bitcoin Pizza Day, May 22nd of 2010, I believe. On that day, a man in Florida posted in a Bitcoin forum, which was like, one of the only places there was any kind of conversation surrounding Bitcoin going on because it was still not well known. And this man said he wanted 2 pizzas delivered to his house and he would pay somebody 10,000 Bitcoin if they took care of that for him. So that was the first sort of like everyday transaction that happened using Bitcoin. So it was kind of this fun thing, People set up faucets so that anyone who visited the page with a faucet could receive Bitcoin for free. The first Bitcoin halving was in November of 2012. That cut the reward supply in half, as I mentioned, and that meant that according to the rules of traditional market function, this decreased supply would mean that the price was likely to go up. And that was totally what happened. And in 2013, that's when I personally started hearing a lot about Bitcoin. I remember distinctly that at least 3 people from very separate areas of my life who did not know one another started talking to me about Bitcoin around the same time, early-ish 2013, because in April of 2013, it hit what were then all-time highs of $263 a coin, which was a huge deal. And I remember consciously thinking that the universe or whatever was telling me to pay attention to Bitcoin, and so I listened. And then by September or so of 2013, the bad energy and the bad narrative had started to come in. There was a website called Silk Road, which was this hub for every illicit activity you can imagine. And people paid for these illegal things in Bitcoin because transactions can be anonymized when you're using Bitcoin, especially back then before the traditional system had, like much engagement with Bitcoin at all. So Silk Road gets shut down and the founder, Ross Ulbricht, goes to jail. He's gonna go to jail for, I think, the rest of his life. It was a long sentence. Side note, Trump just pardoned him after taking office. I knew his roommate at the time's dad. He was doing bad things and it wasn't very obvious to those around him. And when that happened, the feds in the US seized $30 million of 2013 Bitcoin. And by this time it had dropped to below $90 a coin because I know I started buying it at $90 a coin around October of 2013. And so at that time, the mainstream narrative was this tool, Bitcoin, is just used for illicit activities. It's not a good thing. The narrative, as I recall, didn't take into account the fact that it was a tool. A shovel can be used to dig a hole to plant flowers, or it can be used to knock somebody over the head. And when the feds seized Bitcoin, that was when I thought it was a great opportunity to buy because it had dropped so much. And I had been researching it and was really interested in the fundamentals. And I was just really excited about what the technology could do to address so many of the problems that I had seen, specifically with misogyny, and also just general dysfunction and stupid design in the traditional financial system, because I used to be a pro stock trader. It was like a Wall Street stock trader. And it was a mess. That system was a mess. So I was buying it. I started buying it at $90 a coin. By the following January, it was at around $1,100. And I sold it at that time. And it was a great trade. That's a great return to get in a couple of months. And I wouldn't have sold it, but I had to sell it to pay bills because I'd already founded Seeds by that point. But venture capitalists put over 98% of their funding into male-founded organizations. And that number has not gotten any better in 12 years. And it's something that Seeds exist to render obsolete. I want Seeds to make VC die because it is such a discriminatory sector and nobody fucking gives a shit about it. And it has made things so much harder for me and for Seeds than they have had to be. In February of 2014, the founder of Mt. Gox, which was then the biggest centralized Bitcoin exchange, went bankrupt. And their founder, an American guy who was living in Japan, ultimately went to jail as well. This pointed to the problems with centralized economic design, because even though they were facilitating transactions in a decentralized cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, the design of the exchange itself was centralized. They held custody of people's money, they held custody of their Bitcoin, and they messed up. And a lot of people were really upset because they lost their 2014 Bitcoin, which would now be worth a ton of money. But in a narrative sense, those were the events that were publicized. That's what cryptocurrency was thought to be, but it was not very widely known. So then we move forward to the next Bitcoin halving, the next market cycle, which happened on July 9th of 2016. Like a year before that, in July of 2015, I believe, Ethereum was created. And Ethereum was a big deal because it was designed to make something easy, which was not easy to do within the Bitcoin crypto network, which was that projects could be built on top of Ethereum with some ease because it was designed to facilitate the possibility of that using something called smart contracts. You can code in Solidity to build projects on top of Ethereum. And that was a really exciting development within the cryptocurrency sector at large. But then in 2016, there was an exploitation and a lot of Ether was stolen. Ethereum had to do what was called a hard fork. And the blockchain, the immutable ledger that keeps track of every transaction that has ever happened within Ethereum, had this fork. But that made a lot of people nervous in like mid 2016. So Ethereum had to address those problems. And then coming into early 2017, which is when I personally started buying Ether myself, then we started to see this hype cycle take place again. But this time it was what people refer to as ICOs, initial coin offerings, which isn't a phrase that you hear too much nowadays. But basically, because it was relatively easy to build a project on top of Ethereum, a lot of people were doing that. And they were treating it like an IPO on the stock market, like the launch of a stock, and raising a bunch of money in like pre-sales.
Hey, me and my girl Jess, we are revolutionizing cannabis for the world. We're killing it.
And you know what we're doing it with? Blockchain.
You saw these cryptocurrency projects raising $15 million or something without much of a plan regarding like what they were going to do or like a user base or anything. And it kept getting bigger and bigger. The hype cycle continued. And then in December of 2017, the bubble kind of popped. In that market cycle, the narrative was more about like, oh, there are these like kind of scammy projects and there's no regulation surrounding this. These projects can take advantage of people. Many probably already have. And this is what cryptocurrency is. So once again, the narrative wasn't good. In the third Bitcoin halving cycle, which kicked off with the halving event on May 11th of 2020, it was a similar sort of thing. The halving happened, things started picking up and gaining momentum, and then coming into early 2021, they really started to reach this fever pitch. And that cycle, a lot of what fueled the run-up was what was going on with NFTs. So we saw like the Beeple NFT was sold for $69 million in Ether. There was some positivity, I think, in that narrative. It was about using new technology to support art, which is a really great thing, a really important thing that just wasn't possible in the same way in the legacy centralized economic system. But then again, it started to get out of control. People behaved in gross ways where they were minting NFTs, which weren't about actually exercising their creativity. They were just about making money. It was much more well known in the mainstream because with every market cycle, more and more people became aware of it and got involved with it, which drove prices up. The Staples Center in LA, it became the Crypto.com Center. Sam Bankman-Fried, I mean, he was speaking at conferences and making large political donations. He got like Tom Brady and Giselle to invest in FTX and to be spokespeople for him. It really seemed like it was reaching this point where it was becoming fashionable in a way that couldn't be avoided. He seemed interested in forwarding social causes, blah, etc. But they weren't managing their centralized exchange properly. And when the market started to turn, and this was driven by the actions of Do Kwon, and the failure of his projects was, to my recollection, the only non-centralized failure that has contributed to cryptocurrency downturns that I can think of. It's almost always centralized cryptocurrency exchanges or entities of some kind that caused the trouble. But he was certainly of that exploitative energy, and it's like every market cycle that kind of gets expunged. So in that sense, it's good. Terra faltered. That had this ripple effect across the cryptocurrency market sector as a whole. And as I understand, FTX was over leveraged. They were using their users' funds in risky ways that their users were not aware of. And there was an adjacent thing with Gemini's centralized platform. They had a product called Genesis that ripped off a bunch of users, and the New York AG eventually stepped in to force them to pay their users. Just literally days ago, I found out that I lost a legal battle with Gemini for also ripping me off about a totally different thing. It's terrifying, like what these centralized exchanges are permitted to do. And it's really going to have a negative impact on me. It's putting me into a dangerous financial position. And so are these narratives. That's a bigger part of, I guess, what I want to talk about today, because they have been so harmful for our social good organization, because all of these people have done bad things, and that then makes the average person who would really like seeds not receptive to hearing about it. So SBF gets convicted and goes to jail and is like at the same jail as Sean Combs. And there are other centralized failures as well. Celsius and Voyager were two others that I recall around that time. And the market turned once again. Heading into the next Bitcoin halving cycle, which kicked off with the fourth Bitcoin halving on April 20th of 2024, something different happened, which was that there was a Bitcoin ETF offered in the US on the US markets. An ETF is an exchange traded fund, so essentially like a Bitcoin stock, a stock that rested on the value of actual Bitcoin. That became available for trade in January of 2024. And that allowed a lot of mainstream investors who, were familiar with trading stocks, but maybe had been reluctant to try trading cryptocurrency before that time. Now they could just trade this Bitcoin ETF instead. So it did create this way for more mainstream investors to engage with cryptocurrency. And so we actually saw Bitcoin hitting all-time highs in January of 2024, even before the halving event had happened. Typically it happens like 12 to 18 months after a halving event because of this institutional involvement. It was kind of a different game. And now it kind of looks like, to me, and I I know I'm not alone in this, the Bitcoin's just kind of going to stay up. Like, it's not going to be as volatile as it used to be in the past, even with this very recent downturn because of Trump's stupid tariff policies that didn't make any sense. Bitcoin didn't get hit that hard. Other cryptocurrencies like Ether got beat up a lot more so. And I think that's because these institutionalists just kind of lifted Bitcoin through that event. And then it just became a narrative about like institutional shit. And it became more boring and just like another thing. The promise of it was lost in some ways, I think. The way the technology could be used, Bitcoin's technology specifically, could be used to reimagine and transform the financial system. Like, that hadn't really happened. That promise hadn't really been fulfilled. And then the traditional financial system just like got super involved because they wanted to get in on the ride and they wanted to benefit from it too. And that is disappointing. However, Seeds is using blockchain technology to transcend what isn't working in these institutional sectors. It's working to transcend the for-profit, nonprofit binary that only exists because there's no room for giving within late-stage capitalism's design. So when you help someone through Seed, you get Seed's cryptocurrency and thanks. So it creates this opportunity for giving people to build wealth because they were kind. And an economic system like that is very different from what's going on in our old economic system and the legacy economic system that we've all been trapped in. But then in late 2024, to my surprise, certainly, Trump won. And now he has a cryptocurrency that is like a meme coin, which he clearly just created like out of greed. And his son, Eric, is doing deals with Middle Eastern governments that are rife with conflicts of interest. And so that is a deeply, disturbingly negative narrative. The reporting on that is understandably showcasing how concerning it is. And that is what people think of when they think of cryptocurrency at this time. A lot of people, the people that would resonate with Seeds, certainly, the people that want this world to continue to progress and become a better place, it makes it look like cryptocurrency is like a tool for authoritarianism. It's time for us to be very, very alarmed about what's happening. And because that's the narrative, a project like Seeds, which is working to address the flaws in the old economic system so that we're not creating more Elon Musk, because if we have an economic system that is designed to reward the people that are giving generously so that they become wealthier, that's not going to create another billionaire Trump. That's not going to create another Musk, because those people have not designed their lives in ways that are about serving and helping others. We need to get away from having this economic system that is about rewarding the worst expressions of toxic masculinity, wounded masculine energy, of ego, of taking from others, these like winner-take-all paradigms. Like, it's exhausting even thinking about all of it. And that's what we have to live under. And no wonder so many people are sick, like physically ill and mentally ill and just despairing when the systems that govern our lives are in this state. And Seeds is meant to intentionally help us transcend that. But because the narratives about cryptocurrency, like there's no awareness of Seeds. I've tried to reach out to like the New York Times to offer a counterpoint to the uniformly negative coverage of cryptocurrencies, a sector that one dude does. It really feels like he has it out for the sector. And that's good that somebody's using investigative journalism as a tool to go after like the bad actors in the space. But it's not good if there isn't something of an objective balance also covering positive stories. And like, no joke, I don't know of any other positive stories that can be offered by the sector besides the ones that Seeds can show. I wanted to tie this into why there are no female crypto founders, like none. I knew of two that were solo founders, one that was a co-founder. The co-founder I think is still around, although I haven't heard about their project in a long time. The other two I think disappeared not too long after they had their ICOs in 2017. There's a lot of conversation sort of, I guess, about like how there aren't women in STEM, how there aren't female tech founders, how venture capital, as I mentioned, over 98% of it goes to men, etc. Even though there's the reams of data that shows that female founders outperform their male counterparts. But because there is so little funding for women, that means we have to survive. If you're a person who is like me, I don't have kids, I don't own a house, I have a tiny house, but I don't have other responsibilities. Like, Seeds is my purpose. I'm so convinced that that's a big part of why I'm here. Like, I think my larger mission is about uplifting feminine energy and helping us come back into a healthy balance of feminine energy and masculine energy in ourselves as humans, and then also therefore in the systems that we create and engage with. That's what Seeds is. It's imbued with that healthier balance from the ground up intentionally. It's not a coincidence that more women give. More women make donations to charities, and more women are poorer. Women have less money. So like with a system like Seeds, where it's like, oh wait, we can actually help the women get richer by rewarding them for giving, and then they'll have more resourcing to do what they're already doing, which is making the world a better place. Isn't that a better system? And isn't that, I feel it is an elegant way to help restore this messed up thing that put women in this position in the first place. But because we live in a capitalist society in which you need money to do stuff, and it takes money to make money, and if you don't have money, you then have to trade your time to get money, it has been so much more difficult to just do basic things. If I'd gotten 30% of the funding that I saw men that I knew getting, Seeds would be so much further along at this point. I mean, I even know, I guess first wave feminism, they really struggled with a lack of funding, which makes sense because women didn't have money. They couldn't raise money because all the people that had money were men, and there was so little interest in helping the women with this. It took time. And I understand that is a function of how our existing systems work. But I also know that when we channel our energies and point our attention to scaling new systems that are meant to render the old systems obsolete, like Seeds is, then the old systems, can do their thing where they fall, and more people will just be drawn to use the new system. So what I'm trying to say with that is, if you're like me, if you're somebody like me, and I also just can keep going. I mean, it's been 12 years or whatever since I initially founded Seeds, and it's been really difficult. A lot of times, it's been way more difficult in the past than it is right now. Although now is another challenging moment for Seeds for sure. But if that's what you're facing, we're literally told that, 2% of what's available is accessible to you. It's made me very tired over a long period of time. And a lot of women leave. So I guess my hope in sharing this is to create my own narrative. That is sort of a gift of this time. I mean, we have a little bit less of a problem with centralized control than we did 25 years ago or something in terms of how we share messages. That's something that is good about social media. We're still subject to whatever the algorithms mysteriously want to do or something, but I can try and share these narratives myself without having to rely on convincing the New York Times to write a positive story about cryptocurrency for once. And to be clear, I have no interest in defending cryptocurrency as a sector. It's treated me like shit. I just want to make the point that this larger narrative and all of the toxic masculinity in it and the way that hits you on so many different levels. And I think that's really what we're expunging from society right now. Like, that's the role that Trump and Elon Musk are playing. They're like inadvertently showing how it's all jumping the shark so that those systems go away for good. And I think Seeds is going to be able to really bloom following all of that. I guess I'll end with this. I like Stevie Nicks a lot. I saw her live one time at South by Southwest. I was in Austin. And I think I just went down for like the tech portion of South by Southwest. But like how they overlap, like the tech can overlap the film festival, can overlap the music festival. So I ended up being down there while the music festival was still going on. And I was staying at an Airbnb. And the host and her daughter were going to go to see Stevie Nicks. And they were nice enough to ask me if I wanted to join. Side note, the mom, who was probably 60 years old-ish or so, she was one of those teachers who ended up marrying her much younger student. As they told it was never inappropriate. He was already out of high school before they started dating. But I think he was 19 when they started dating. And so he was there. So it was just kind of interesting to see a relationship like that in person. I'd never known anybody else who'd been in that situation. I mean, it's a rare situation. So we went to the concert and I was sitting by myself. I couldn't get tickets next to them or anything. And I loved her so much. It was this show where she said she was treating it like she was in her living room and she was just telling us stories about coming up. And actually, as I'm telling this, I realized I don't know that she told this story that night or if I saw her tell this story another time about when she was still in the throes of active addiction and stuff. I think in the early 80s. And recovery was obviously going to be really hard. Making the decision to take that step was going to be really difficult. She imagined a girl, a young woman who thought, oh, I wish Stevie had still been around. I wish she'd moved through it. And thinking of that girl or young woman gave her the strength to go to rehab. It's gonna make me cry thinking about it. And so I guess that actually is the real purpose of this, sharing this today, because I've been trying a lot in a lot of different ways to share these thoughts and ideas and messages about seeds and so forth. And it really seems like at this moment in particular, we have a course coming up in 6 days, and the course supports seeds. And I talk about trading and share all the knowledge that I have about this sector. And I think it offers a lot of value. And there's so little interest. I don't even know if anyone is even going to take this course. And in the past, I could get people very easily when the narrative about cryptocurrency was a different thing. And I've used that course to sustain seeds until the world shifts enough so that a project like Seeds, which is about building abundance through giving, can really take off. So it's felt like when I'm making these videos, maybe they're not for this moment, because at this moment, they're not getting through. They're mostly not getting through. The people that do listen and are interested, I appreciate so much, but there aren't a lot of them. And it's weird. It almost feels like an energy has been messing with me to try and cut that off. I really do feel that way. So I've started thinking maybe this is for the future. And maybe it is for that girl, that young woman or girl who, in the future might think I'm glad that Rachel kept going. I'm going to cry. I'm glad that Rachel, pushed through this or whatever. And that is who it's for. It's so that those women in the future, those girls in the future, can grow up in a better world, because we're not oppressed by systems that are so bogged down by those energies, by those wounded masculine energies. And that we're also aware enough to look at things through that framework and identify that when it's at play. So I guess that's all I want to say. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.